these people are denying me access to these projects. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone that you have who has information on these operations, documents, they have a green light to disclose all of it, because that is a criminal enterprise. So when people say, did any official ever greenlight the disclosure project? I said, you better believe it did. The head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States Pentagon. I think that in a sense, humanity right now is viewed as collectively nuts, insane. Look at what we're doing. If you're afraid, they won't come. If you're a bigot, they won't come. If you're an alienist who is, they're good and they're bad and they're this and they're that. In other words, you're a racist. If you're a racist, they won't come. But they will come if you have a pure heart and a pure intent. The idea that they're going to land and just impose some kind of sense out of this chaos isn't going to happen, because
could the free energy devices be turned into weapons of mass destruction, putting a potential nuclear bomb in every basement or car? Have you asked any of your contacts this?
Yes, well, I sort of addressed this. The propulsion systems are easily weaponizable, and that's very classified. And that's going to be, but the ones that are just tapping into the zero-point energy field, those are not like a hydrogen bomb. And now, could you theoretically use that device to power something that was a weapon? Yes, but it wouldn't be a weapon of mass destruction. But you can take your car or your truck and run it down the Champs-Élysées and run over 100 people, or in Nice last summer, and kill 86 people. So the issue becomes another one where it's a sort of reality check. We either are going to bring these technologies out and stabilize the biosphere and also the geopolitical situation, where the disparity between poverty and wealth is growing and growing every year, and get our civilization back on track, or we're not. And the not means termination of our civilization, one way or another, either geopolitically or geophysically. So it has to happen. There's 100 years of lost evolution on this planet, what we call the lost century, the term I coined, because we really lost a century of evolution on our planet, and that has to be corrected. And in order to correct it, it's going to take a lot of people doing it who are not vested in the status quo. And if they are vested in the status quo, they don't care anymore. Like one of my biggest supporters and people who've helped me for the last 20 years was at one point the 4th largest oil exploration company in the world. And he says, I made my money doing that, I'm done. I want to help you. So there are people who turn over to this. And by the way, if you look at this Majority Intelligence Committee, so-called MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C, that is the name of the entity that is at the top of running covert programs related to UFO matters, about 70% of them are in favor of disclosure. And when we started back in the early 90s, it was about 30%. Now you say, well, 70% are in favor, why didn't it happen? 2 words for you: Bill Colby. So when Bill Colby was about to defect, and did defect, and was going to hand off one of these technologies to us, they found him floating down the Potomac River the week he was going to meet with my board. And so what happened was that there was a shot across the bow and say, stay in your box, don't go off the reservation. And the 30% that are hardliners don't mind eating their own. They do not mind killing their own people, and they will. And so when I was going to give up, someone asked me the personal weight of this. In '94, I was going to shut down my project 23 years ago in July. And a guy came down whose family founded the California Institute of Technology and was very involved with the NSA. And also, he was sent by someone from the science director at CIA, begging me not to give up, because they're on the side of wanting this disclosed, but they know they can't. And if they do, they're dead. And they were saying, don't give up. And I'm going, well, what the hell do you want me to do? And, it's this sort of going through the looking glass weirdness that has happened in my life between the early 90s and now. But what I came to realize is that a lot of those people are actually looking to you guys. You're looking to them and they're looking to you. Power of and for the people. That's what we have to do. Yeah.
Greer opens by turning contact into an ethics test, not a technology test. But the Pentagon's AARO says none of the cases it has resolved point to extraterrestrial beings, activity, or technology. His lost century warning lands harder because the nuclear danger is real right now. SIPRE says the world entered 2025 with roughly 12,241 nuclear weapons, with 9,614 potentially operationally available. So the opening tension is not are UFOs real, it is whether humanity is too unstable to be trusted with another leap in power.
Is it possible that extraterrestrials can interact with you in your dreams?
Great question. The number one way that humans through history have had actual contact with transdimensional interstellar civilizations is in the lucid dream state. Now let me explain what that means. It's not like you had a bad pepperoni pizza and had a nightmare. It's when you're awake within the dream in a state of lucidity and you know you're in a dream, but you're actually having an experience. And I actually met my wife that way. I had five lucid dreams in a row, and was shown this woman that I should marry. I was 22. I said, I didn't get married. And then a couple months later, I met her in this dimension, and I knew it was her. And that was, be 38 years this August. So lucid dreams are very important because what they enable you to do is to get out of the intellect and the confines of space and time. And what we're going to do tomorrow, we're going to spend a huge amount of time dealing with the nature of consciousness, mind, transdimensional physics, and extraterrestrial technologies, and where those all come together. Because if you understand that, then you can become an ambassador to their people and make contact. And you're going to see some amazing photos and images tomorrow. It's going to blow your mind. So, of contact we've had doing this. Now, you can say, well, that's during a meditative state where you do remote viewing and engage in these protocols. I say, yes, but you can then go to sleep that night, enter into that state, and then they will contact you. And you can have an experience in this lucid state. And I think that this has been very common. Now, why is that the case? I'm going to tip my hand on a little bit of what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I had this Lockheed Skunk Works spook officer contact me a few years back. And he ostensibly called me to be one of our witnesses, one of our Disclosure Project military witnesses, corporate. I said, great. He says, but really the reason I'm calling you is that it turned out years ago he had been practicing something that I was not in the tradition I practice. I use a Vedic type of meditation, a Sanskrit. He was doing something Rosicrucian, he was trying to learn how to astrally project. In other words, have his astral, the body of light, leave his physical body and fly around. And he, tried and he never could. Finally, his teacher came to him and said, look, you're ready, you practice enough, just let go and let yourself do it. And it was sort of an affirmation. So he laid down that afternoon, began to practice this. He went out of his body, right up through his ceiling, went up in the atmosphere, and then collided into an extraterrestrial vehicle that was in a transdimensional energy field and moved it. Listen carefully. Very carefully. If you get this, you're going to understand so much that it'll connect dots. And he said, how is it that in my astral body, my dream state body, this body of light, this is just an outer manifestation of that, by the way. Consciousness is essential. And the body of light is emanating from the point of consciousness, which then manifests the body and the plants and the stars, etc., and so on. So the cosmology has been turned upside down by reductionism and materialism. But this conscious field is what is primacy rests with that. That's essential. And I said, when you are in that astral body, And an extraterrestrial interstellar vehicle, which has gone from one star system to another, but has not stepped down into 3D matter, it's in an energy form that very closely approximates the conscious astral body. And since they are of a similar density, you can move it with your astral body. He went, oh my God, he says, that makes total sense. The funny part of the story is that he popped into the side of the craft with his astral body, but the ETs could see him. They were at a console, and they looked at him like, my God, why don't you watch where you're going? I was like, it was an interstellar faux pas. He didn't say hello, didn't knock, just popped in. Now that's a true story. And it does get comical, and it sort of blows people's paradigm. But remember, I tweeted this out, and I got so much feedback, like WTF sort of remarks back on Twitter, because I said all interstellar extraterrestrial civilizations are transdimensional, but not all transdimensional beings are extraterrestrial. There are beings that reside in other dimensions that aren't ET, that aren't from physical planets and stars with bodies. However, any civilization that can go beyond the speed of light, they're not accelerating in a linear way. They are going into a phase shift, very quantumly, and into another dimension, and go then through those dimensions to another point in space-time and rematerialize. That's what they're doing. But guess what? Those dimensions that they're phasing into at a higher resonant frequency is very close to the astral body and the thought forms. Not identical, but close. And so the lucid dream, yeah, there's a lot of action there. You can have amazing contact with that. Does that explanation confuse people? No? Yeah, this is a group is advanced, you know. Yeah, okay.
Greer now moves the conversation out of hardware and into consciousness. And the closest mainstream definition of lucid dreaming is simply becoming aware that one is dreaming while still asleep. That matters because the U.S. South government really did preserve a declassified archive of remote viewing and parapsychology work in the CIA's Stargate collection. But the key friction stays intact. Those archives prove government interest in unusual cognition, not public proof of Greer's extraterrestrial contact claims.
What led you and the C-SETI team to the discovery of higher consciousness meditation being a bridge for peaceful communication? And can you talk about your first successful team contact?
Well, that's a very long answer, which we'll get into a great deal tomorrow. But the reason I got involved in this whole issue was when I was 17, having been raised a very devout atheist, where nothing existed that you couldn't put in a test tube, I got very sick. I had an injury on I'm still missing part of the muscle on my thigh here. And being a jock teenager, I bicycled 200 miles on this injury in one day. It got inflamed, infected, and I had a breakdown of the skeletal muscle that clogged up my kidneys. I went into hepatorenal failure, and I died. So I had a near-death experience. I was 17. It's my last year of high school. And when I had that experience, because I wasn't raised, with this belief of a angry God throwing lightning bolts from Mount Olympus. So I just went into space because I always loved the stars. And I had a cosmic consciousness experience. And I had a unity consciousness, actually beyond cosmic consciousness, where the entire cosmos was awake. And I was one with that awakeness, and I was the whole cosmos. It was beautiful, perfect, beautiful. And I didn't really want to come back, but I was told I should, so I did. And I said, well, I'm going to have to figure out how you have an experience like that. So I began searching different traditions and meditation approaches, and I learned to meditate. So I learned a Vedic Sanskrit meditation approach, and it's rather comical. The first time I sat to meditate with my teacher, he did a beautiful puja, And then we did the meditation. He gave me a mantra, and I did it, and I transcended. So I went into unbounded consciousness the first time. Well, it wasn't the first time. That's why I went. And at the end, he was staring at me. He says, "You transcended, didn't you?" I said, "Well, isn't that what you were supposed to do?" I was so naive. I didn't know you had to make a hokashrai about it, and make a big deal. So and that was on my 18th birthday, which is, wow, well, my birthday is Wednesday. So it was almost exactly, I'll be 62. So however, I was when I turned 18. So quite a long time ago, 44 years ago. And 6 months later, I was meditating up on a mountain in North Carolina, and it was beautiful fall day, crisp and cold. I was up about 5,200 feet, and I went into this, right before sunset, I saw this ET craft clearly materialize. It materialized, dematerialized. I said, "Oh, they're back," because I had had a sighting when I was a child, when I was 8 or 9. And I sat and meditated. I went right into that same state that I was in when I died. It was beautiful, beautiful state. And I must have been in that meditative state for a couple hours. When I opened my eyes, a beautiful thought that said, "Behold, what a beautiful universe God has made." And I looked up, and the whole Milky Way was going across the sky, crystal clear air. And then all my hair stood on end, like an electrostatic thing. And that's when I had hair. It was long hair. And this creature, about this tall, maybe a little taller. I'm tall, so everything seems short. But with kind of almond deer-like eyes, touched me on my right shoulder. And I'll never forget, because I looked down, and I had a ski jacket on, and it indented like that far. And I went, whoa. And with that, I dematerialized and went on a craft, and we co-created the CE5 protocols that I'll be teaching you tomorrow. So that's how all that's, so that's, it happens, and that's why I'm here. So, but that was like a beautiful experience. So I didn't do anything with it, but then eventually in 1990, I had 3 cosmic contact experiences that happened on the full moon. I'm a Cancer, so I'm like crazy moon child. On the full moon of January, February, and March of 1990, where I was basically told to start this project. And asked to. I wasn't told to, I was asked to. And so I formalized these close encounters of the fifth kind protocols that use sound and lasers and lights and consciousness and remote viewing to do the contact. And the very first time we went out in 1991 in Belgium, we had a massive craft come right over us. And then in 92, of course, you all know about the Gulf Breeze Pensacola event that's in the film, where the guy goes, "Holy damn hot shit." I was just teaching people this. There were 60 people there. There were colonels from the Air Force and everything. And people at first didn't understand it. The only people who understood it really, really well were the folks at SRI, Stanford Research International, Dr. Bob John, the Princeton Engineering Lab, about consciousness, and the CIA folks and people because who understood non-locality consciousness and the fact that these ET communication systems are modulated through coherent directed thought into an electronic system, which is what I experienced when I was 18. So this is a mind-blowing paradigm, because everyone's still thinking very materialistically about something that is multidimensional. And so it was something that from the very first expedition, we had contact, and it worked. And I said, well, it seems like the ETs want this to happen. So I was working full-time as a doctor and raising 4 small children, but little by little, of course, it overtook. And it was because of that event in 92 that the intelligence community came knocking. Because what I was told is, after being rather nastily threatened, was that they realized that we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of interstellar communication using consciousness, non-locality, remote viewing, and very deep states of consciousness, but where coherent thought connects to the extraterrestrial communication systems and then shows them where you are. But within an ethical paradigm of universal peace and peaceful contact. And then they're going to come. If you're afraid, they won't come. If you're a bigot, they won't come. If you're an alienist who is, they're good and they're bad and they're this and they're that, in other words, you're a racist. If you're a racist, they won't come. But they will come if you have a pure heart and a pure intent. And understand the protocols, which are not difficult. I always tell people, if you're awake right now, you can be aware of the awareness whereby you are awake. And in that singularity of consciousness, as Erdem Schrödinger said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it is a singularity. We all trap it. We capture it and trap it in our egos and our bodies and ourselves. But in reality, the nature of the conscious mind is that it's omnipresent, infinite, all the time, whether you acknowledge it or not. But there are protocols and practices in meditation that you can do that put you in touch with that expanded, infinite aspect. And from there, begin to operate, whether it's in the lucid dream or whether it's out under the stars with a team of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind folks. So, yes?
Well said, Doc.
This is the conversion chapter of the story. Near-death experience, meditation, childhood sighting, first contact, then the formal birth of the CE5 framework. The atmosphere around that story gets stronger because America's classified aerospace and reconnaissance world is undeniably real. The NRO's own declassified history runs through Corona, Poppy, Quill, and other Cold War intelligence programs. And Lockheed Skunkworks practically writes the subtext for him, openly saying some of its most important work isn't in the headlines by design.
Do you think the extraterrestrials at some time will need to save Homo sapiens from themselves?
We'll have to what?
Do you think the extraterrestrials at some time will need to save Homo sapiens from themselves?
Well, that's what's going on. Everybody hear the question? That's why they're here. Now, remember the big, look, various civilizations have been surveilling and involved this planet for millions of years, maybe billions, but certainly millions. There's nothing new under the sun in that regard. However, the modern era of events began with the atomic weapons program, as you saw in the movie. Colonel Diedrichson, who is head of all the Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the Department of Energy projects dealing with weapons, nuclear weapons, said that every single weapons facility, uranium, plutonium facility, intercontinental ballistic missile facility, weapons storage area had been overflown and surveyed by these ET craft, because they were very concerned that we could get so out of control that we could destroy all life on this planet. But also, and there's a bit of enlightened self-interest here, that there's a very short distance, and as Ben Rich said, we already have the means to take ET home. So 70 years and trillions of dollars in R&D covertly have resulted in our having capabilities that could be an existential threat to other star systems. So not only are we dangerous to ourselves, we're dangerous to others. Now, for an emergency doctor, that's what you put on a thing to get someone involuntarily committed into the loony bin. And so I think that in a sense, humanity right now is viewed as collectively nuts, insane. Look at what we're doing. We have 100 years of Tesla-like technologies that have been viciously suppressed by sociopaths, and we're destroying the biosphere and have impoverished and enslaved in poverty billions of people. So, on top of it, we're not only destroying the biosphere, but we have thousands of these thermonuclear weapons. Now we're wanting to go into space with these weapons, et cetera, and so on. So I think that there is a very deep concern. Now, a lot of people say, well, why don't they just come and fix it for us? And I always say this is a little bit like, how well did that experiment go in Afghanistan with the warlords? We went in there, we're going to start Jeffersonian democracy in a feudal medieval society. Not. So, and the difference between Western civilization and the feudal warlords of Afghanistan is not as great as the savagery of human society right now and these other civilizations. So the idea that they're going to land and just impose some kind of sense out of this chaos isn't going to happen, because how many people are parents in here? Yeah, a few. So if you don't let your children learn the lessons they have to learn, and you put them in a bubble like a helicopter parent, they never develop. They'll be 30 years old and living on the couch, being worthless. So you have to let a developing civilization, the analogy being, go through these developmental pains. Now, there's a point where there would be an intervention. Massive thermonuclear war, a biosphere collapse, a tilting of the magnetic shift in the poles where there would be massive so-called earth changes. There are certain scenarios where there would be a massive intervention to stabilize the system briefly so we could then move on. And that is a lot of why they're here, observing and watching and waiting. But the primary responsibility to fix the problem rests with us, not them. So I always caution people against what I call cosmic codependency, where they're either looking for a savior in a flying saucer or a demon. And I'm going, forget about that whole discussion. Let's look the man in the mirror. Go look in the mirror if you want to see where the problem is. And we have created these problems, and we can fix them. And that's what they're waiting for us to do.
When a hydrogen bomb detonates on Earth, how does that affect the other dimensions? And is that why or one of the reasons the ETs are here?
Yes. In fact, it's interesting because if you understand electromagnetic pulses that accompany a weapon of that discharge, there are also energy fields that cross into the scalar longitudinal area, which go beyond the speed of light, that cross into other dimensions that are highly disruptive to energy, propulsion, and guidance systems that are extraterrestrial. So if you begin to look at this, you begin to realize no man is an island and no planet stands alone. We think that there's these vast distances between Earth and our sun and these other star systems. And in a linear way, there is, but in a non-linear, non-local manner, when you're talking about these other dimensions, they're right next to each other. So where is the separation when there is perfect integrated oneness and non-locality as the operating physics of the cosmos? This is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So if you understand that, then you can see why a civilization that goes on a trajectory that we're on, even using these weapons, is destructive and disruptive to other civilizations and star systems, but not in a straight line way, the way you would think of a normal signal, but in a longitudinal scalar signal, which it doesn't have a waveform like this, but goes at multiples of the speed of light out. So this is something that obviously got someone's attention when we started detonating atomic weapons in the 40s. Thence Roswell, right? That was the only nuclear bomb squadron in the world at the time. It just wasn't a coincidence they were surveilling that area, because they knew not only was it dangerous to Earth and to our planet and to humanity and potentially to them down the road, but the actual utilization of those weapons was disruptive because of the energy forms that cross beyond the speed of light through these other dimensions.
10:30.
We'll take one more question.
This is where Greer upgrades the argument from sightings to species-level risk, nuclear weapons, biosphere collapse, and a civilization too immature to handle its own power. His atomic age framing is effective because nuclear systems really did reorganize modern security institutions, and the NRO's declassified history shows how fast high-secrecy reconnaissance architecture grew in that era. But the official U.S. South conclusion still rejects his underlying claim. AARO says it found no verifiable evidence that the government or private industry ever had access to extraterrestrial technology.
If USAPs are illegal and those who come forward can't be prosecuted, why isn't everyone coming aboard?
Yes, good question. Well, you have to first educate people who've been in these projects that they're free to speak. And I think that if you've been in that system, you're indoctrinated with, you don't tell anyone, you don't talk about it, and you're told you'll be killed. All right? So the fear factor is enormous. I mean, for every disclosure witness we have, there are literally a couple dozen that have given me information I've met with who are terrified to come forward. But what I think that we have to do is find more people with the courage to speak about the research they've done here in Canada. We've had facilities that have dealt with these technologies throughout the United States, UK, Australia, other countries, and begin to speak about it. And I think that they need to do it understanding that we have established the legal basis for them to speak without penalty. Now, does this then absolve them of the risk of a wet works team? You know, wet works are, well, I know a guy who heads one up. Wet is from blood. It's a wet works assassination team. And it does if they do it correctly. If they try to do it secretively and in a clandestine way, they're very vulnerable. If they do it fully out there, they won't be. So one of the things that was promised to me after several people on my team were targeted and some of them passed away, I had a man who came to me and said, do you want, for you and the people who come forward with you, executive protection? And I didn't know what that meant, and he meant lethal force to protect you. And I said, no. Initially, I said no. But after some horrible things started happening, I said, yes. And that's operational. So the worst thing that the cabal could do, if I step off a curb and get hit by a bus, it's going to be assumed it wasn't an accident. Same thing with anybody who steps forward out of the military or corporate world or intelligence community. And that is in place. And, you know, it's interesting because people are so, aren't you afraid? I said, well, first of all, I don't give myself over to fear. But last year, I think we were in Palm Springs at a conference, and a woman came up to me who said, you know, my husband was on a deep Delta Force team, and they were assigned to assassinate you not too long ago. And well, you know, I hear about this a lot, and she was telling me this, thinking I would be nonplussed, and I went, yeah. And she said, well, 10 minutes before they were going to activate the plan, they were pulled off. And I said, yes, of course. But so what I'm saying is there are some folks who do not want to see disclosure stopped. And they're tired of this nonsense. And I think that the specter in people's mind of fear is, as they say, fear is the mind killer. Fear stops you from doing the things that you know is the right thing to do. So we have to, if any of you know folks like that, you need to explain to them that none of the people who have worked openly, name, rank, and serial number with us on this, and since 1997, no one on my team has been threatened or has been harmed. Now, you can't predict the future purely on the past, but here I stand. So I think that what we have to have the wisdom to do is to explain this to people and say, we need you to come forward, the world needs you to come forward, and if somebody has a technology or documents pertaining thereto, they need to come forward with those, because all of those projects are being run illegally and they cannot be prosecuted. Not like a Snowden affair, where Snowden was disclosing things that were being overseen by the president and the Congress, no matter how ill-advised those programs may be and however Orwellian. But those were legal top secret programs. I'm talking about illegal, unacknowledged special access projects. And those projects we can disclose without penalty of any legal system. And we put a system in place that we're also not subject to the kind of problems we had in the 90s, where we did have loss of life, like CIA Director Colby. So I think that is what we're wanting to convey to people and get more and more and more of these folks to come forward. Because if let's say, what if suddenly that word, if all of you became ambassadors reaching out to those sort of people, and 1,000 more Disclosure Project witnesses came out, name, rank, and serial number, documents, their DD-214, whatever it is, the equivalent in Canada. You know what? Couldn't stop it. So we need to pick up the pace on that, but it has to be something where people understand that they have clearance to do so.
Now the metaphysics drop away and the interview becomes procedural: indoctrination, compartmentalization, assassination, fear, and why insiders stay silent, even if they believe they are legally exposed. Greer's strategy here is clear: not one hero, but a flood of named witnesses, documents, chain of custody records, and public testimony arriving together. The state's answer is the opposite direction. The Pentagon says the alleged hidden extraterrestrial programs were either non-existent or misidentified national security programs unrelated to alien technology.
And one last thing before we leave. Some years ago, I took the late astronaut Edgar Mitchell with me to a briefing. I was doing a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon for the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. And prior to going to that meeting, I had provided him with an NRO document that's in the movie and in the book Unacknowledged, that had the project code names and code numbers as of the 1990s. And this meeting was in the spring of 1997. It was right after we did the congressional briefings in Washington that were private briefings. They weren't public. This was still when it was Project Starlight. You know, it was still very on the down low. So when I went to this meeting, I took Edgar Mitchell with me because he was just learning about these things. And I was helping mentor him and share what I knew with him, like I did with Paul Hellyer and others. And we get to this meeting, and I find out that this admiral, who is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2, had found one of these compartments, recognized it, that was in this document, called them up and said, I want to be read into it, or briefed. And he was told, sir, you don't have a need to know. And he says, God damn it, I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. How can I not have a need to know? And they said, sir, we cannot discuss this with you. Click, hung up on the admiral. So by the time I got, this happened all before, because I sent a brief ahead of my, a dossier ahead of my physical entry. And when I got there, the anger and the fear in this admiral's energy field was palpable. And so I did the brief. It was supposed to be a 45-minute stand-up briefing. It went on for 2 or 3 hours. The only reason it ended is Edgar Mitchell had to go to New York to be on a TV show. And at the end of it, I asked the admiral for his help. And he said to me, he said, these people are denying me access to these projects. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone that you have who has information on these operations, documents, they have a green light to disclose all of it, because that is a criminal enterprise. So when people say, did any official ever greenlight the Disclosure Project? I said, you better believe it did, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States Pentagon. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I said, okay. That's what we'll do. The other thing he said, very interesting, I said, will you help us? He says, how can I help you? He says, who else has had this happen to them? I said, well, I'm going to brief the president and the CIA director and the Secretary of Defense, Cohen, and send the senators on the Senate Intelligence Committee, some of them. And he says, were they all denied access? I said, yes, all of them. He says, well, then what the hell am I going to do? He says, I've learned that the best thing I know about is a B-2 stealth bomber. And these covert programs have man-made UFOs that can do circles around it. He said it, you know, it's point, set, match. So, and he said, moreover, I can't take an action against such an entity without authorization from the civilian leadership, or then I'm going rogue. And the Secretary of Defense and the President wouldn't authorize it. So there you are, checkmate. So it all fell back in our laps. And so now it's in yours. And mine. So, I think this is how you have to it's funny, I got contacted by a big Hollywood movie producer who I won't mention, who wants to do a full-length feature film about all this. And I said, I don't think you can do this in one film. There's so many bizarre stories, and all of it true and all of it documented. But when the day is done, what we have to realize is that All of us on this planet now who are living and breathing during this great civilizational transition are responsible for creating universal peace, a new civilization based on justice, abundance, and free energy, to disclose this information, and then for our children's children, leave them a civilization that is in a state of enlightenment and peace for hundreds of thousands of years. That's why we're here.
The ending hits because Greer frames the Wilson episode like the deepest possible institutional confession, the sealing of the system discovering it cannot see its own basement. That is why the NRO document and Joint Chiefs material matter dramatically. They anchor the story inside real classified architecture rather than abstract mysticism. But the unresolved final tension is what gives the script its charge. Greer says the green light to disclose already exists, while AARO says even with unusually broad access, it found no evidence of extraterrestrial technology or an illegal cover-up.